Hi, welcome to another episode of Experiential Realism, and the name, which was a term once coined by my friend Stephen Woolard as inspired by the conscious realism of Donald Hoffman, is now redolent of the state of pure awareness that one can reach through practices like meditation, which Tibetan Buddhists would call the Rigpa state. It's now, more than ever, reminiscent of that state as suggested by Professor Philip Clayton, as we touched upon the innermost nature of the mind during our dialectic on consciousness studies about 2 weeks ago. I also shared my Summerland experience with Dr. Melvin Morse 3 weeks ago before I started recording our conversation, and he had expressed a willingness to discuss it in more depth, but we never got round to it, so I might invite him back on the show soon. For those who don't know, the colourful background with a winding river, cottages, well-groomed trees, a golden city and rainbows in the sky, which I sometimes use when I have a guest, is actually a depiction of my Summerland experience, which was an experience of profound nostalgia and love that I felt when I was aiming to induce a lucid dream. I came to call it my Summerland experience because I would later find descriptions of that otherworldly scenery in a book by the British psychologist David Fontana. Some of you might have heard of him. The book was about the afterlife, of course, and there was a chapter that recorded descriptions of Summerlands by deceased individuals coming through mediums to tell their living loved ones where they were. That was a striking coincidence for me at the time. Now, I started this podcast about a year ago now, and the reason being that I saw that there was a widespread interest in metaphysics, and idealism was apparently starting to rear its beautiful head and become popular again, popularized by people like Hoffman and Kastrup. And there was a thirst for understanding the nature of reality. And I must say, it's been quite productive. I've talked to some very interesting people, and I've come to learn many things to do with philosophy, science, but primarily I am an artist at heart. But there's no harm in combining these interests. Now, to get to the point of this video, and I think it's going to come in two parts really, it's a two-parter. I would just like to recap my journey from being an agnostic regarding metaphysics to becoming a materialist, and then journeying into idealism, or what I think is the most plausible metaphysics in town at the moment. I wasn't always an idealist. In fact, not too long ago I was a staunch materialist prior to 2022, and I was also a de facto atheist, the latter which I still am in some respects. What made me have a paradigm shift was when I noticed what was happening in the scientific community in the sphere of quantum physics, such as the physicists who won the Nobel Prize in Physics for demonstrating that there are no hidden variables. Superdeterminism is false, local realism is false, and reality is actually weirder than what the Newtonian model implied. One of the scientists who won the prize germane to the experiments that violated Bell's inequalities is Anton Zeilinger, who subsequently wrote a paper arguing for metaphysical idealism, the idea that reality is all mind. The reality we all share is a mental construct, and consciousness is fundamental. Around that time, I also saw conferences on consciousness where experts from different fields were puzzled and scratching their heads at the mystery of consciousness and unable to solve the hard problem under physicalism. And I witnessed the strange revival of panpsychism and also, of course, idealism. I'd already heard of Donald Hoffman, even as a physicalist, because I saw Hoffman presenting his theory, which I thought was really outlandish at the time, on the same stage with Daniel Dennett and Stuart Hameroff. But it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I really began to pay attention to what Hoffman was saying, and then I found Bernardo Kastrup and his analytic idealism, which also made sense. Now, prior to embracing idealism, I was already an avid lucid dreamer. The reason being that I've always found consciousness to be mysterious and fascinating as a subject. I was puzzled by it, even as a physicalist, and I was always keen to explore my own mind, I suppose. Even from an early age, because as a child I'd had some lucid dreams, some experiences apparently out of my body, and eventually I would begin a proper practice, and I would explore methods of induction, and I would, I've been a lucid dreamer, an avid lucid dreamer, for about 15 years now, so quite a long time. And I've been exploring my own mind and what my mind can do, what consciousness can feel, can generate in its altered states, away from the default mode. What can I say? I've come from a Christian background, thanks to my mother, and she was also into spiritualism, and probably still is. But as a teenager, I broke away from her religious beliefs and religious beliefs altogether eventually, and I would, as a teenager, delve deeply into science, and science, as I was growing up, was kind of told as a narrative under the rubric of materialism. It's almost like materialism, or physicalism if you prefer, was accepted as a truism, and it seemed like scientific data, conclusions from experiments would always be pointing at the materialist model, I suppose. There was no room for any other kind of metaphysics, and the more I delved into science, the more of a materialist I became. I was a materialist. I was a naturalist, And I still am a naturalist in a different kind of way now, I would say. Not a materialist naturalist, I'm more of an idealist naturalist. I would say, as a naturalist now, that consciousness is fundamental because it couldn't be any other way. It's just the way it is. It's, you know, if anything is going to be said to exist, consciousness has to be the bedrock. It has to be the bedrock of reality. It couldn't be any other way. I really believe that, because if you don't have consciousness as the ontological primitive, then you might as well not have anything in existence. Then you know, there's just no existence, no confirmable existence if consciousness isn't there to begin with. You know, so yeah, unlike my mum, I became a naturalist as opposed to a supernaturalist. Even though I suppose supernaturalism is a term which could be employed by some to mean that there is something more than the world that we can observe and verify empirically. But I would say that if we come to discover something beyond the observable universe and beyond everything that we can all empirically confirm to be the case, I would say that that's just more reality, that's just more nature that's been uncovered. So you know, I actually tend to avoid the word supernatural, because I just think that it's just more nature, it's just more natural things to be discovered out there. It's just more reality, it's just more nature. So there's no real reason to say that, you know, that anything beyond this universe, even if this universe is spawned by something greater and incomprehensible to the human mind, it's still going to be more reality, you know. So I think employing the word supernatural depends on taste, I suppose. You know, I would rather just avoid it, just because it brings up unwanted connotations. You know, I feel that when we employ certain words, we can put off a lot of people out there, and it shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately that tends to be the case. So I try to use language that everyone can accept, and by using those universally accepted terms, hopefully more people will grasp the new paradigm shift to do with metaphysics, to do with metaphysical idealism, I suppose. You know, it will persuade more people to break out of the physicalist model, which is closed-minded, I suppose. And anyway, if we have an afterlife, it's only because nature allows it. You know, I speak of an afterlife as allowed by nature, not because you know, I've read somewhere that that's what people who adhere to a certain kind of religion believe. So so unlike my mum, I became a naturalist. I broke away from religiosity and even spiritualism, and now I'm more open to that word as I moved away from physicalism. I also explored the New Age movement, even as a physicalist, just because before I seriously started my lucid dreaming practice, I came upon instructions on how to induce out-of-body experiences, or OBEs, in a book by Michael Powell called Mind Games. And once I tried to induce OBEs, I felt I could see that I could have them. But those OBEs weren't always in the physical world. They would happen in dream worlds, which I would suspect were other realms, other planes of existence that some people call astral planes. There would be the upper astrals and the lower astrals and stuff like that. So I was exploring that belief system, and with an open mind. Even though I was a physicalist, I was wondering, what is it about reality that under the physicalist model makes these other realities possible? So I was still thinking along those lines, and then I flirted with dualism. I thought, well, perhaps there is a physical world, and then there is a spiritual world. Maybe Descartes was right, but I always remained agnostic, and I guess that kind of dualism was threatening my physicalist worldview, but I was willing to. I didn't embrace it fully. I was suspicious of it, so I would explore these other states of consciousness and probe their nature and do experiments in these other states, and eventually I came to think that, and bearing in mind that beliefs can shape your reality. If you believe that you're just exploring dream worlds created by your mind, that they don't really exist, they're just sleep hallucinations that you're inducing, and you're managing to become lucid in them, then that's exactly what you're going to see, what you're going to find, and your beliefs begin to paint what you see in these other states. So you end up cocooned in your own thought forms, which can take realistic forms and shapes and colours. So it's like your thoughts are reified in these other altered states of consciousness. But I also began to find that some of the dream characters in some of my lucid dreams could display semblances of sentience. So I would often get the robotic mannequin type of dream characters. I would get these NPCs, I would say, You know, like they weren't really playing the game. They were just like zombie-like denizens of the dream world. You know, oniric zombies. They were just lifeless thought forms, there for you know, to be played with, there for the taking, there for me to do as I pleased with them, you know. And but then I would encounter these rarer characters which seemed to have their own autonomy, and they would sometimes look at me and give me the chills, to be quite fair. You know, they appeared to see right through me, and as if to say, yeah, I can see you. I know that you're conscious, but I'm conscious too. And I know that you have a feeling. I am also just as aware as you. And then I would wake up terrified, because, you know, I would wake up thinking, oh my God, I was aware that I was dreaming. I was having a lucid dream, and yet this other dream form, dream figure, seemed to have a life of its own, and I had no control over it. So it's almost like I had been visited by something from beyond the creations of my egoic mind, I suppose. So yeah, I was exploring these altered states of consciousness, these other belief systems, and eventually I just abandoned it all. I never abandoned my lucid dreaming practice. I'm still fascinated, and I've always been fascinated by lucid dreaming, because I think it's a great tool to explore your own mind and what consciousness itself can do. But I began to abandon any belief-centric views to do with spiritualism, to do with New Age, and eventually I just embraced Physicalism, because I thought that Physicalism could explain everything, and I was wrong. And then I used to think, okay, they still can't explain how consciousness emerges from the physical brain, but eventually they will. It's just that the brain is far too complex. But then I couldn't ignore this niggling intuition telling me that consciousness arising from unconscious matter doesn't seem to make sense. In fact, it's counterintuitive. So I was having an intimation that the emergence of consciousness from dead matter makes no sense. So, and I was making every effort to wrap my head around it. I was even trying to wrap my head around what people like Daniel Dennett were proposing. You know, the eliminativism that he was espousing when he was alive, that consciousness is not even an epiphenomenon, that consciousness is just an illusion altogether, and therefore if consciousness is an illusion, it doesn't actually exist. It's not really there. It only seems like it is, which doesn't make one iota of sense, to be fair. So I was thinking there must be some kind of physical explanation behind consciousness. And I've always said, even if there isn't a deity out there, even if there is no divine creator, even if there is no God, it doesn't mean that there is no afterlife. And perhaps there is one, and under the physicalist model, there could be some mechanisms that would permit the existence of an afterlife. Perhaps quantum mechanics enables our consciousness to survive beyond physical death, and by the process of quantum entanglement, perhaps, or and I also explored very strange concepts in quantum physics, such as quantum immortality, and and perhaps we die in this universe and we are born in another one, maybe even a parallel one, where we are still ourselves, but we would become ourselves doing different things in those universes. But now I've abandoned, as you all know, I've abandoned that paradigm, and I've now embraced a different kind of paradigm, where mind comes first, consciousness is primary, and everything else follows. And even under the idealist model, it could be the case that there is a multiverse, and this multiverse is actually the imagination of an infinite mind at large, a cosmic mind that begets all manner of conceptual worlds and narratives and feelings and emotions and all manner of minds that we probably will never be able to comprehend or even fathom or even conceive of as human beings in this lifetime. So yeah, if God exists, it doesn't necessarily mean that we that we to flip the argument, if God exists, it doesn't necessarily mean that we exist forever. And I used to think that, but then I've come to the point where I'm beginning to think that God is still only a human concept. There could be something like a God, or something that goes beyond anything we can comprehend, beyond anything that we can define as God. And it's one of those things that we that I find very hard to put into words, really. It's strange, but yeah. So I used to say, if there is an afterlife, it doesn't mean that God exists, and if God exists, it doesn't necessarily mean that we exist forever. But now I think that if you're going to have the concept of God, and by necessity that God is omnipresent, it has to be consciousness, and that's what we are. And consciousness transcends time and space, the way I see it. It's irreducible. It cannot die, by virtue of everything that I've just said, and therefore that's the only God I can conceive of. If I'm gonna be if I'm gonna be forced or persuaded to use the word God, to never drop the word God, then I would say that the bedrock of reality is God. I would say it is consciousness, and consciousness would have to be God, and therefore we are God, and we're everywhere, and God is eternal, therefore we're eternal. So Actually, I think we can only say that even if our conceptions of God don't exist, that an afterlife is still permissible. So there could be an afterlife, but no gods that we can conceive of as human beings. But I don't think it works the other way. If we're going to say that God is everywhere and we are God, then we can't really say that just because there is a God there is no afterlife, because by necessity we must have an afterlife. We must exist forever, because that's what God is. God has to exist forever. God is beyond time and space. God is eternal. So yeah, during my New Age phase, or by flirting with the New Age movement and the communities that they had at the time, years ago now, I would try to induce altered states of consciousness, OBEs and lucid dreams, just to see if there was something to what they were claiming. But obviously my conclusion at the time was that they were interpreting the experiences that are possible, the range of experiences that are possible for humans to have. They were interpreting them their own way, in a belief-centric way. So I bought into physicalism and dismissed some of the most extraordinary experiences that I had, as eventually I would just view them as, if they were precognitive, or if I seemed like I remote viewed and saw exactly what was on the minds of people that lived across town from me, and they would confirm this, I would just eventually think, oh, maybe they were just coincidences, or perhaps in the past my subconscious mind picked up on things about them which remained buried, and now I've retrieved them. I've managed to bring them back to the surface in these altered states of consciousness, and that's the reason, and that's why it seems like I had it seems like I have visited them in out-of-body experiences, or like I remote viewed, or somehow I also saw the future, or I had some kind of precognition, and I would think to myself, well, it's only apparent precognition, that didn't really happen. I didn't really see the future. I didn't really manage to step outside of time. Basically, the reason why I seem to have glimpsed future scenes is because my brain is a remarkable machine, a remarkable Bayesian machine, making predictions all the time, and my own brain has managed to impress me. That's how I would think anyway. But now I don't see it like that anymore. I think some of these experiences to do with precognition, for example, have too many specific elements that go beyond just seem to go beyond just coincidence, and also seem to go beyond prediction based on variables that the brain came across in the past. It just seems to me like some of the information that you can get from remote viewing, for example, and even from these precognitive states, seem to be very specific. And I actually, because sometimes I watch a program called Slapped Ham, and they show videos of that people filmed of strange things, videos that people think were the paranormal captured on camera. And once they actually showed the clip of a podcast that took place 5 months before the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump. And when I still managed to be skeptical of what I see on these programs or on these podcasts. So when I was watching that on Slapped Ham, I was thinking to myself, hold on a minute, I bet, because Slapped Ham was basically showing a video of a self-proclaimed prophet, right, who had gone on a podcast to do with making predictions about the future. And there was this self-proclaimed prophet who, according to the program Slapped Ham, had made a prediction about the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, and mentioned, and apparently this was prior to the assassination, according to Slapped Ham, mentioning specific details of his last attempted assassination. Mentioning that a bullet would go through his ear, and he would move, and then he would get down on his knees and surrender to God, and then he would use God as an excuse to get votes, and get people to vote for him, because now God has saved him, and the reason why God saved him from that bullet was because God wants him to save America, right? So as I was watching that on Slapped Ham, I thought to myself, no, surely this can't be true. I think I'm perhaps being duped by Slapped Ham, by the host of Slapped Ham. Maybe this clip of that podcast about prophets took place after the assassination, and now Slapped Ham is trying to make out that it happened before the attempted assassination. So I decided to have a look, and decided to try to find the original podcast, and lo and behold, I found the original episode of that podcast where the prophet, the self-proclaimed prophet, made the prediction of what would happen. And it happened, and as it happens, the prophet made that prediction 5 months before the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. And when I saw the original video 5 months before the attempted assassination, the prophet was describing specific details. If he had said, someone's going to try to kill Donald Trump, and offered no details as to how it would happen, then I would think, big deal. They've tried to kill Trump before. So it wouldn't be impressive. But what was impressive is that he described the trajectory of the bullet, how it would go through his ear, and he pointed at the right ear, by the way, and he described how Trump would behave in the aftermath, and that came to pass. All of that came to pass. So it makes me think, it makes me think that perhaps he tapped into that precognitive potential inherent in consciousness. If consciousness transcends space and time, then we can all access those states. We can all step away from this space-time construct, and we can fast forward in time, or perhaps visit the past, and we can glimpse scenes which are not currently happening, at least from our point of view. We can become privy to events that have not yet come to pass from our perspective. And I think it's possible that that self-proclaimed prophet did exactly that. Maybe he decided to, maybe he's used to employing some kind of meditation or some kind of technique, or even he tries to induce lucid dreams, and he manages to remote view the future. I don't know, I can't be sure of anything, but it's quite striking. It's really out there. For anyone who Googles this, they can see it for themselves, and they can see that the original video dates back 5 months before the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, which is quite remarkable. Anyway, where was I? So there's something to those experiences, and I think because I also had experiences like that of my own, and also to do with what Carl Jung called them synchronicities. It's actually making me view reality in a different way. I used to be not just an atheist, but a nihilist. I didn't think reality had any intrinsic meaning other than what we make ourselves as human beings, because reality always means something to us, whether it, we might deem certain events to be good or bad for us, or boring, and whatnot. But I used to think there's no point to any of this, that, there's no meaning, there's no purpose to any of this. But now I've done a U-turn. I think there is meaning, there is some kind of purpose, I think, which goes beyond the purpose and meaning that we make for ourselves. I'm not talking about meaning and purpose generated by our egoic minds. I'm talking about felt meaning and purpose, and apparently subliminal messages from the world out there, which seems to dovetail nicely with Aldous Huxley's Mind at Large and Kastrup's worldview, that there's a mind that extends beyond our what would you say, our egoic minds, a mind, a universal mind, which goes beyond our partially dissociated human minds. Apparently, and according to Castrop, we're partially dissociated or apparently dissociated from a mind at large. So anyway, I no longer dismiss extraordinary experiences as just mere coincidences, and I now don't hold the opinion that they're all hallucinations. I look back post paradigm shift and find myself revising them. So as you can tell, I've been on a journey, and that's part of the reason for experiential realism. Experiential realism records all that. I don't want to lose all that experience that I became privy to, which this physicalist mentality has made me dismiss over the years. For the longest time, since I was a kid actually, I've been artistic, but with maturity I also began to develop my analytical side, and I guess I've always had an inquisitive mind. I've looked into quantum physics with curiosity, and I found that Bell's theorem is quite interesting. And Bell's theorem actually sets a mathematical limit to determine whether or not hidden variables in reality exist. And if it were the case that hidden variables are true, then superdeterminism would be true, and Einstein, if he were alive today, wouldn't have been so troubled by quantum entanglement or spooky action at a distance, as he called it. But yeah, I always found it very weird, and the violation of Bell's inequalities, even prior to 2022, when John Clauser, Anton Zeilinger and Alan Aspère won the Nobel Prize in Physics after demonstrating through decades of rigorous experimentation with the entanglement of multiple paired particles, that hidden variables don't exist. In fact, they have never even been theoretically described by anyone. So reality is really weird, as the results from the scientists went well above Bell's limit. So it became quite apparent to me that subatomic particles can behave as though time and space don't really exist. The universe is akin to a projection from the source, and objects don't have any causal power. They only seem like they do. But it's the source that does everything, and I would argue that it's source consciousness, the ultimate reality, that gives rise to everything, that begets the madness that we all see around us. The discovery that local realism isn't true would be a nightmare for Einstein, really, who co-authored the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox paper, a critique levelled against quantum theory, as Einstein thought that hidden variables had had to explain spooky action. There had to be hidden variables. And as he famously put it, God does not play dice to express his deterministic view of the world. He abhorred the probabilistic framework of quantum mechanics. Because of Einstein's logic and quantum theory's largely counterintuitive nature, Bell's theorem went largely ignored for decades until John Clauser had decided to test it. So, but there are other ways to test reality, really, which don't always involve scientific experiments. Like lucid dreaming, for example, for me is primarily a tool with which I can explore my own mind and see what my field of awareness, my own consciousness can do. For example, the bright colours and hyperreal qualities of a lucid dream, which can far outdo those in waking life, tell me that my conscious potential isn't just restricted to what I perceive when I'm awake. There is a lot more that consciousness can do, not just in perceptual qualities, but also our imagination can impel us to make changes to the world that we share in waking life. We can imagine better and far more interesting versions of our world. These are just examples, for me, consciousness is the ground of all being. It is dimensionless and yet capable of having a multi-dimensional appearance which includes time and space. I think it all converges to a monistic framework. I think it's a monistic idealism. Really, it's all mind. It's not that consciousness is in space-time. The very fabric of space-time exists in consciousness. And I also think that the information we get can come in symbolic form. Again, to revisit what Robert Wagner talked about, sometimes we should pay attention to the symbolism, because it can tell us a lot more than just experiential prose, as it were. I think, just as there is a lot that can be said through poetry, there is also a lot of information embedded in symbolism, if we really pay attention to what our minds or our subconscious minds are telling us. It's also a reality of meaning, really. I think meaning is part of the fabric, the very fabric of reality. Meaning comes with mentation, and the symbols can convey different types of meaning. It's almost like one mode of mentation which creates an appearance to sentient beings or conscious agents can also evoke other types of dimensions in consciousness, other types of feelings, which can mean something to the observer, to the conscious agent. And sometimes the meaning that's conveyed isn't readily accepted by the observer, or isn't, always obvious at first. It might take some time for the conscious observer to realize what something meant, something that they were exposed to. I think consciousness manages to create multi-layered realities. Anyway, some people think that my paradigm shift came about because I was in isolation during the COVID-19 period. You know, we had lockdowns here. But I actually resent that. In fact, I try not to be biased by the things that happen in the world. I just care about what's true, and I will literally follow what seems more compelling to me. Having said this, I do have my ups and downs in life, like everybody else, of course, but I try not to let that cloud my judgment, because we are all prone to moments where we allow certain events to cloud our judgment, but I always try to combat that. I try to view the world from an unbiased perspective. It's important to remember to value facts. Facts above everything else, I'd say. Facts and reason. I think I've said this before. I live by this motto: I'd rather have a cold, harsh truth than a consoling lie. I've said this before as a physicalist, and I continue to say it as an idealist. I'm still a naturalist at heart, and I will uphold the truth above everything else. I care about what's true. Above truth above everything else, apart from love. I love my wife, and love is just love conquers all. But anyway, that's besides the point. So yeah, to home in on the main point. When I say that consciousness is irreducible and fundamental and the ultimate reality, I mean it in the sense that it couldn't be any other way, as far as I can tell. I mean it in the sense that the world didn't emerge ex nihilo. The universe is a collective dream world, as far as I can tell. It's a collective dream world in the one consciousness. As I was saying to Professor Philip Clayton during our dialectic, consciousness is just one thing, one awareness. We can't speak of two or more awarenesses as though we're talking about completely different phenomena. Consciousness is only one phenomenon, and I'm not talking about consciousness here being a phenomenon in the Kantian sense. I'm just trying to make it clear to everyone that consciousness and awareness, we can use those terms interchangeably. Consciousness, awareness, they are just one thing. If I am aware of things, if I am consciousness, and then another person is also aware of the world and therefore also consciousness, on that level, never mind the differences in our minds, never mind how we diverge, and never mind that we have led different lives and we have come to perceive different things about the world. Never mind all that. Never mind that at any given time we can think of different things and speak different things and be focused on different concepts and ideas and whatnot. At the level of consciousness, we are the same thing. We are one. It's just one. So that's what I want to emphasize. I want to stress that, it's as I said before, it's a monistic idealism, and consciousness manages to beget different minds, and the illusion of separation. But we're not really separated. We are basically the same ocean. We are Brahman, but we can be different Atman, I suppose. We can express this Brahman thing can fracture into different and distinct selves, egos, whatever you want to call them, and they appear to be different things. We appear to be different and separated sentient beings, but really we are the same thing. It's almost like apparently we're one consciousness that manages to fragment itself, and then we, or some of us, or the majority of us, have come to believe that we are entirely different. But I don't think so. An awareness is a knowing, and if it exists in me, and if it exists in you and everyone else, and we are it, because we can cease to be aware of our bodies, and we can just experience being a pure awareness, then awareness, consciousness, that knowing is essentially the same thing, right? So and it couldn't be any other way, and it makes no sense to talk of two or more awarenesses as though we're talking about totally different phenomena. That makes no sense. Awareness is awareness, right? So what was I going to say? Yeah, in the past, I've also made the point that the ground of existence can't be nothingness, because this one doesn't exist by definition. It is only an abstraction, so the next level up from that abstraction, which can and does exist as the foundation of all appearances and representations, is consciousness. So that makes that makes the main idealist point, or one of the main idealist points, really. I think this is going to be a two-parter, to be honest. I think this is going to be part one of a journey from physicalism to idealism, I suppose. And I'm going to revisit some of the topics I've already covered before, because I think they're important and they bear repeating, really. So we live in a world of concepts, a world of appearances and layers of meaning, as I've said before. And everything exists in consciousness. There is only consciousness and its content, which are mentations. So the universe is a mental construct, a collective dream. It's and we can tell by looking at how the universe itself is one entity, and we're not human beings separated from the universe. We are the universe, human being. We are waves. We are part of that quantum wave function that describes it. So we are the waves of the universe. The universe is waving. The universe is human being through us. So and this quantum wave function, presumably, if we're gonna think in terms of linear time, it began from the Big Bang, and it has continued up until now, and it goes beyond the present moment, I suppose. It's a complex thought or idea, I suppose, in the mind of God. And I've got no problems with the term God, in this respect, because I'm not talking about the biblical God or the scriptural God as interpreted by the majority of religious people. I'm talking about God in the sense of something that goes beyond it. God as in God is more in us, more in the sense of Spinoza's God, in a pantheistic sense. That's the word I was looking for, and even panentheism. So this is idealism, basically, and the monistic part comes with the realization that God is consciousness and it is everywhere, and it's in us, and we are God. There's an old Sufi proverb that says, "I looked for myself and found only God, and I looked for God and found only myself." And the word God is also just a concept in the human mind and our human imagination, which is the product of infinite consciousness experiencing itself and experiencing what it's like to be a finite being. It actually, no narrative and no explanation that we can come up with can quite cover what is probably the case. In the spirit of Donald Hoffman, I would say that our language and our imagination as human beings through the anthropic lens is incapable of apprehending the infinite, the absolute. Just like we can't apprehend the mind of another person in the same way that we apprehend our own. We currently live in a world of representations. When I look at another person, I see a human body, and if I were to open their skull, I would find a brain, and their brain would only be a symbol, an appearance on my screen of perception. So their brain would only be, in the line of thinking a la Castrop. It would only be a partial representation to me of what their human mind is like. And I say partial representation because your neurons don't tell me the full story of what your mind is about. I'd have to be you in order to fully grasp it. Your consciousness is a first person ontology. So when we look at other people, they represent what human minds look like from a second person perspective or third person. Brains are like footprints, but they tell you nothing about the walking. In a similar vein, the quantum realm is what the pleroma looks like from, there's that word again, pleroma. It's what the pleroma looks like from a second person perspective. It's what the source looks like to a spatio-temporally restricted perspective, such as a human being. I tend to call it the quantum pleroma because in Christianity a pleroma is the totality of the Godhead, the totality of emanations, making the source of our universe spiritual. Hence the reason why the quantum realm appears to defy human logic with its superpositions, with its wave particle dualities, entanglement, tunneling, and everything else. So it's pregnant with infinite potential. The roots of our reality, essentially the quantum level, appear fuzzy because what we are seeing is a symbolic representation of what that omnipotent realm, wholesome with infinite potential for finite expressions, is capable of. It's that pleroma begets finite expressions, but in order to do this it needs to chip away the excess information, and hence why we get entropy, and if we are perceiving this wholesome reality from our bounded human perspectives, we are going to see an entropic world, So all we see is symbolic representations of an underlying reality, and if we didn't see it, we would, what was I going to say? If we don't see, if we can intuit that there's something more that we can't see, that we don't perceive as human beings, but we have indirect evidence for it, but we can't perceive it with our senses, but we in some way we will perceive it with our senses, but they might not be as obvious as the information that we get from other senses. We might not be able to see it, but we might see the effects of an invisible something on the things that we can already see. We can see that visible things are being affected by something that we can't perceive, so we build machines in order to try and detect the invisible. So that's what I was going to say. If we don't see it, we build models or maps of it in order to try to make sense of it. But appearances can only convey so much, just like a lot gets lost in translation, as it were, when we are telling someone about experienced events. Language doesn't always cover it. that's one of the topics that I've covered before. Language is a very poor translation, and this is something that I think Franz Kafka once said. We see symbols, and the symbols are the well-defined objects that we can perceive with our senses. We see them at the classical level of reality, and because our minds tend to objectify everything perceived, we also see a representation of the quantum. The macrocosm is one type of decoherence of the subatomic world. Beyond the microcosm is a creative force which has most likely given origin to other worlds, some of which we would probably struggle to imagine with our currently limited personal minds. After that Nobel Prize was won in 2022, the following year I saw Christoph Koch lose a 25-year-old bet to David Chalmers, the man who coined the term hard problem of consciousness, because his neural correlates to Testanoni's integrated information theory failed to explain consciousness as a byproduct. That same year I witnessed renowned experts with opposing views about consciousness, and all of them seemed to be scratching their heads about the phenomenon. Donald Hoffman also pointed out that physicists at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, the ones who deal in high energy physics, noticed that that it took endless pages of algebraic equations just to describe a single particle trajectory, which was really counterintuitive until someone suggested that perhaps we should regard space-time as just another feature of reality rather than a fundamental. When they did so, the mathematics got simpler. They became simpler, taking just a single page to describe a single trajectory, and new geometries were discovered which have to exist beyond the Planck scale and symmetrically map onto features of our unified quantum field, such as mass, spin, momentum, etc. So what should be fundamental, if not space-time? This is when consciousness was suggested, reviving the old conclusions arrived at by the Wigner-Neumann collaboration, which they had shied away from because they feared back then what their peers would think, and to some extent idealists still fear being ridiculed today in the scientific community. One of the geometric shapes that contain decorated permutations, giving rise to the Markovian dynamics of our space-time construct, is the amplituhedron, which contains trillions of dimensions, and of which our universe is only a tiny derivative. Hoffman et al. Describe our reality as akin to a cheap headset VR, which is removed at death, and the conscious agent then presumably becomes aware of the wider reality and the oneness of consciousness. In Hoffman's view, which makes sense to me, only conscious agents exist, and the world, the worlds which are perceived are merely illusions, illusions that form part of Cantor's infinities. There are most likely other headsets, so to speak, which are better and unimaginable to the human mind. Our world, according to his conscious realism, is a cheap projection, as it were, of a more wholesome reality. And but he is also humble enough to state that we will probably never have a theory of everything as human beings. In essence, our world is made of incomplete information from a complete source, which seems to match what we observe about our entropic world, where life forms struggle to self preserve and compete for resources, as is the case in Darwinian evolution. But of course, in the realm of the source, there is no need for competition, as there is no scarcity of resources. It's a pleroma again. That word. It's a totality. It's I suppose it's the absolute before things become finite, before things become finitely defined, before things become entropic. You know. And if you want to preserve the notion of God, I suppose the pleroma is God's imagination, and everything that's contained in the pleroma, good and bad and horrible and blissful and everything else, and wonderful and nightmarish. It's just information, and this information is God's experience, and he can experience those things as in finite forms, in restricted perspectives, such as the anthropic one, such as a human being or an animal, even an amoeba. But as a totality, he would, he, she, it, if we're going to employ that word, it's basically the mind at large. And the mind at large is God's knowledge, is, omniscient. That's his omniscience. And he can't help but know horrible things. So that would be one solution to the problem of evil. People always, in the spirit of Epicurus, people wonder why is there so much suffering and injustice in the world and chaos. If there is a good God, according to the world's religions, and if he's supposed to be omnibenevolent, why, and omnipotent, why doesn't he stop all this chaos? Which is in line with what the reasoning expressed by Epicurus. He expressed the problem of evil, and one solution to that problem is to say that God can't help but know. But then again, that takes away God's free will, because and it would be in line with what Castrop has claimed. There's no real free will if the mind at large, or that which begets the world, can't help but be and do what it does, because it couldn't be any other way. It can't help but be what it is. So, and because it can't help but be that, there is no free will, and it can't possibly be blamed for being that very thing. It's I feel like free will or lack of free will or determinism is another can of worms, perhaps for another time. Perhaps I can bring back Richard Oxenberg to discuss those topics. But yeah, I don't think if there is a God, if we can call that pleroma God, if we can call the absolute God, I don't think that Godhead is to blame for the horrors it contains. And in a sense, as a solution to the problem of evil, I suppose, and to, we could have a Theodicy in which God, meaning us, us as a unity, the collective, even Jung's collective unconscious, and perhaps other derivatives and other mental realities and constructs, everything put together as one thing. All this information which exists in consciousness, and consciousness is privy to it, all that dimensionality makes God, or at least from the perspective of the Godhead, realize that everything is okay, really. Whatever happens within it is just God or Brahman, whatever word you want to use it, it's just the absolute. It's just that divinity moving, It's like God moving its limbs and its fingers and thinking and having nightmares and experiencing what's possible, and what's possible from our perspective looks infinite, and it's perhaps stuck in that cycle of experience, forever exploring new scenarios, forever experiential, and novelty is eternal because there's always something new to be experienced. It's something that we can't possibly fathom, and I think once this chapter is over, once we come to the end of our lives, and if we reach that level of consciousness, if we reach the divine realm, we come to realize that we perhaps took life too seriously. Perhaps we didn't need to formulate different types of moral philosophy. Perhaps we didn't need to come up with, self-interested theories of moral philosophy, or consequentialisms, or utilitarianism and whatnot. Perhaps we didn't need all that to try and reach some kind of summum bonum, as Immanuel Kant put it. Perhaps we didn't need to take life so seriously. Perhaps it's just all for the sake of experience. It's just different modes of experience, and and we get to learn from these experiences. We get to learn about being brave. We get to learn about virtue. We get to learn about how the good can come from the bad and vice versa. We get to learn about the polarities, which is a concept which also exists in Hermeticism. We get to learn all of that, we can derive meaning from these experiences. It's all very educational, I suppose, for the soul. But yeah, it, you know, we can call it universal consciousness, we can call it whatever, you know, something that encompasses everything, including its ostensibly dissociated loci of experience, which is essentially us. Yeah, so we are in a sense God, but we are also God because God is consciousness. The I am that I am. To put it in a Christian context, not that I'm advocating for any of the Abrahamic monotheisms as they are interpreted today. It's a bit like what Jesus Christ said: I am both the Father and the Son, which is like saying I am both the drop and the ocean, the Atman and Brahman, as I said before. Now, for the longest time, I used to think that no theodicy in the world can vindicate a good God in the face of evil. But if you take seriously a kind of pantheism and panentheism within the context of idealist metaphysics, you come to realize that God is in fact as innocent as a child. If everything happens in the infinite mind of God, and God is omniscient, then God has by necessity all concepts in his mind and all possibilities. So that explains good and evil. Explains chaos and order. It explains all polarities, all dichotomies, right? Everything is allowed. It's just a grand theatre, for the mind. And if our universe is a complex bundle of thoughts in this divine mind, then one can argue that God is no more evil than a good person who has nightmares at night or imagines worst case scenarios when anxious. Just because someone has bad thoughts doesn't necessarily mean, that they are bad people. In the case of people with multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, it's not that, it's not their fault that they have several alter egos in the same body, and that some are more unpleasant than others. The original person is not to blame. Now, as an infinite and omniscient intelligence, in order for God to know both good and evil, both concepts manifest in the mind, hence our reality. The book of Job illustrates this very well when we can we can see and come to realize that all judgments of good and bad, fair and unfair, come in the form of Job, the form of a human being. So his dialogue with God, where he protests against him, is a dialogue with himself, which leads to the realization that the universe, which is God, will do its own thing willy-nilly. It's nature, and we, in turn, are the universe. This is why very often in NDEs, near-death experiences, people report that judgment doesn't exist where they go, and that they get a sense of oneness, and that things have always been that okay, always been that way. Everything is always okay from that perspective, closer to the Godhead, or as they expand to merge with the mind at large. Um, the theatre of Earth Realm looks like child's play. It shouldn't have been taken too seriously in the first place. It was only an illusion. There was no real danger. It only looked like danger from the human perspective. Everything goes for the sake of experience. It's pan-experiential. Um, if it's pan-experiential, why would the one consciousness and the whole judge itself? Perhaps that's why NDEs come to realize that there's no judgment. They only judge themselves because they still, even though they're expanded and they often perceive a wider reality, they are still referring to themselves as an individual, I suppose, and because of that, they still end up judging themselves, or at least that speaks to one phase of the near-death experience, because I think it's the near-death experience often expresses a continuous transition where they can have a life review, and then they visit other realms, and then they're privy to more information, and they become aware of a wider reality, and they acquire so much knowledge that when they get back, they lose most of it. Knowledge that doesn't seem to fit the tiny human brain. And so there's a transition that they go through. Their minds expand, they become aware of a wider reality, but they haven't quite reached the Godhead. They haven't quite relinquished their egos in a way. So at least at the point where they have a life review, because even though there's no judgment from the divine light that a lot of people experience, and there's no judgment from the beings of light, which some refer to as angels, the experiencer still manages to regret some of their actions in their lives on Earth, that they happen to review. They still have regrets. They still wish that they had done things differently. They still feel awful about some of their misdeeds. I think perhaps death, real death, not near death, but real death, when it's final, theoretically speaking anyway, people relinquish their egos and they acquire this universal knowledge, and they embrace this divine love, and they are completely free, and they no longer judge themselves because they exist in oneness, and there are no mistakes in oneness. Nothing can go wrong. From that perspective, everything looks okay, I suppose. And hence the misunderstanding between, which is only a symbolic story, hence the misunderstanding between Job and God. So any judgment that happens comes from us, with our egos, with our egoic perspectives, which we relinquish at death. And, you know, the near-death experiencer can still experience self-judgment, but the beings of light or guides that sometimes accompany them only express love, compassion, and understanding. In fact, love seems to be a common theme that is experienced in NDEs, an unconditional love, which in Neoplatonism is an essential intrinsic feature of the One, the source of everything, of all conceptual realities. So when some people say God is love, as ludicrous as it may sound to some people, it may actually be true. I've reached a state of pristine cognition once, which had a blissful quality beyond words. Which I think I've told practically every guest on this show. And that state was like, it's beyond words. Like I was that essence, like I had discovered the spark of divinity, and that divinity had always been in me, prior to all concepts. And it's a state that makes me want to be there forever, and that's probably why people don't want to return from their NDEs most of the time, because they feel so happy there. Perhaps consciousness itself has an intrinsically blissful, loving quality, and it makes sense when you take into account what the Buddha said. The Buddha said that we search for happiness in illusions, but if we acquire a stillness in meditation, we come to realize that we are already whole, complete, and intrinsically happy. It's I think desires beget unsatisfactoriness. When we desire as human beings, we are opening the door to suffering, and that's okay. That's part of the human experience, and we can learn from that. But if we have reached, let's say, the Godhead, and everything looks okay, then we have no reason to desire anymore, and that's the end of suffering. As Seneca once said, he who wants nothing challenges Jupiter, who himself wants nothing. It's something along those lines anyway. But we can reach that stillness in meditation for sure. I mean, I've stumbled upon it. I know it's possible, and it's at the core. It's who we are. We are happy already, but we just don't realize it because we've come this far. We've restricted ourselves to the point where we seem hopeless, but we are intrinsically happy. We just need to discover that spark again, you know. So really, there is no need to chase anything. But as Dr. Melvin Morse would put it, I don't think we're supposed to know that anyway. I think we're supposed to learn, because you know it's like a school, isn't it? You know, Earth is like a school, and it's best that we don't know that everything is okay, or that it's best that we don't have absolute certainty of it, you know. And hence why we still entertain the possibility that the afterlife could be nightmarish, but I don't see any evidence for that. You know, it's very rare to come across reports of nightmarish NDEs, and if they're indicative of an afterlife, and if we experience unpleasantness and horror in the afterlife, I guess it would only be brief, because from most of the nightmarish NDEs that I've come across, they quickly turn blissful. They don't last, you know. So there's no need to chase. As the fictitious Patrick Jane from The Mentalist once said, the less you look at the world based on likes and dislikes, the more at peace you'll be with yourself. So perhaps God, what we are, something in us and all around us, is that space without judgment, space, so to speak, where everything is loved unconditionally and allowed to exist in its own right. And from NDE reports, and if indeed they are glimpses of an afterlife, that is certainly seems to be the case. You know, you have the evidence right there. You know, it does look like, from the monistic perspective of an expanded consciousness, experiences are just vibrations in the medium of mind. Everything is okay. So, you know, and nightmares are okay. In fact, the avid lucid dreamer often says to the novice, you know, to those who aspire to become lucid dreamers, nightmares are good. You know, a nightmare is a good thing, because you can trigger a lucid dream from a nightmare. You know, if things are so horrible, if you are experiencing discomfort, if there's some kind of unpleasant event which is so horrible, you know, an event which doesn't normally happen in real life, you can remember to become a dream detective, to spot dream signs. You can ask yourself, am I dreaming? This is so bad. I'm so uncomfortable. Am I dreaming? And then you're free. Then all of a sudden, from the nightmare, you wake up. You realize the truth. You realize that you were just dreaming, experiencing a creation of your own mind or whatnot. And time stops, everything stops, and you can change the narrative, the plot of the dream, and you can carry on. And often, from, you know, you can use nightmares to get in touch with aspects of yourself, and it can feel truly liberating. You know, you can and it wasn't just Carl Jung who talked about, you know, individuation. Even people like Stephen LaBerge talked about self-integration through lucid dreaming and through nightmares. So I think the Buddha said it well when he said, there are no bad dreams. You can always find the good in the bad, you know. So I think you can reach a point where you just accept what is. You don't try to change anything. And there you go. You find that stillness where everything's okay. You know, you're all loving, all accepting. And it's a good place to be, because you stop the struggle. That's it. You're just content. It's almost like describing nirvana, really. You no longer desire, you no longer chase, because everything is okay. Everything, you know, the peace, the happiness that you find isn't contingent on any event taking place. You know, it's not contingent upon any particular mode of consciousness. You know, so everything is okay. It's just the one doing its thing, perhaps exploring itself, or perhaps exploration is also just a concept of finite creatures within it, and exploring implies an arrow of time, which is also just a perception in consciousness. I would venture that consciousness, as the Godhead, transcends both space and time, and it could explain why NDEs often report that it seemed as though time didn't exist, or temporal perception was quite different. Many report faster thinking, supernormal cognition, and as though in 1 second they could receive information that could take years for a human brain to process. There is obviously a lot that we don't know, and I think even if we had a population of Einsteins working on a theory of everything for 1 billion years, we wouldn't even begin to scratch at the surface of what reality is really like. You know, so through Job, God comes to understand moral concepts and a sense of injustice apropos of the human perspective, you know, to the exclusion of all universal knowledge possessed by the mind at large. And there's another layer of reality on top, which includes meaning, you know. And, you know, meaning is another layer of reality. And I would say that even as human beings, we can access multiple layers of reality. I think we can expand our perspective as human beings. We can step outside the human default mode of perception and access other dimensions of consciousness from the mind at large. I really do think that's possible. You know, and we can connect with other people too, other egoic minds, and you know, I've already recounted my experience of apparently visiting myself across London, across from where I live, and not exactly seeing what he was doing at the time, but I seemed to remote view what was on his mind at the time. You know, my friend who happened to be into meditation and Buddhism at the time, and he was trying to relinquish his cherished possessions like his CDs. You know, he loves music, he plays guitar, he loves the bands he listens to, and he was trying to get rid of his CDs at exactly the same time that I was visiting him in an OBE, in an apparently telepathic OBE, and it seemed clear to me that I was traveling through a mental realm, you know, because I also seemed to have perceived things which coincided with what he was thinking at the time, you know. So it's a different kind of remote viewing / telepathy than the norm, you know, which usually involves accurately perceiving verifiable events in the physical world, and I say physical to make a distinction between, you know, what goes on in someone's mind, personal meditations, and the real world, which I still maintain is only a derivative of the mind at large, or a derivative of a pleroma which exists in universal consciousness, because I am an idealist, and you know, it brings to mind you know, the theory by the late Professor Michael Persinger, who invented the God helmet and conducted remote viewing experiments with Ingo Swann and others. You know, Persinger posited that the quantum entanglement of minds is possibly, you know, a thing, you know, within the geomagnetic field, which makes me think that perhaps sometimes the more favourable conditions within this field increase the chances of lucid dream telepathy. Who knows? And it may be the case that when we notice that the lucid dream replicas of our abodes don't match those of waking life in a precise manner, is due to the fact that memory doesn't always get things right. So we may perceive an elaborate gist of what is actually the case in waking life, or sometimes the inaccurate replicas we encounter in those altered states are based on how we sometimes imagine them to be from desire and the very creativity of our imagination. A picture of slight change to what we are already familiar with, as the mind is like a storm never at rest against the backdrop of a clear sky that is analogous to the stillness of pure consciousness. Mental realities then would be nothing but symbols of representations in motion, conveying concepts and meaning, communicating information. The inaccurate replicas could be largely based on memories, but also partially influenced by intricate webs of mental schemas. There could be extra layers of perception that we impose on the screen of perception, that we are already familiar with in this reality. And perhaps in the case of OBEs and NDEs, we may acquire a new screen of perception that incorporates more information. But this, of course, is more speculative. We could also use the concept of multi-dimensions as another way to conceptualize what's going on. In any case, I would maintain that the dynamics are certainly mental in nature, pretty much like everything else. I'm actually so glad I'm able to entertain this type of thinking, because had I remained a physicalist, I would just dismiss it all. I wouldn't even entertain the possibility of the quantum entanglement of minds as much as I do now. I would think that remote viewing is the stuff of woo, so I'm really glad I got to this stage. I just feel so dismayed at the fact that in the scientific community still today, academics still have to worry about what they put out there. They still have to worry about conforming to the physicalist paradigm, lest they be judged to be lunatics, to be quacks, because they're worried about their reputations, their careers, they're worried about funding, they're worried about being shunned by the community at large, not having their work published, not being recognised. It's career suicide to just think outside the box, to go against the norm. It takes a brave soul to stand up and say, look, perhaps we all have it wrong. Perhaps we're making the wrong assumptions about reality. We need to consider other possibilities which might seem crazy to us at first, but we should go there. We should be brave enough to go there. It's a shame that such minds are rare, and and because of that, because of the worry about conforming to the prevalent way of thinking, because of their worry about funding, the public ends up being misinformed about certain scientific experiments, like the fact that psychedelics turn out to majorly reduce brain function, and yet people report rich mental experiences. And over the years, the results of such experiments were distorted, not just by the media, but also by the people who came up with those experiments. It's like they were afraid to inform everyone about what those experiments were really telling. They sometimes even formulated their experiments to beget ambiguous results, or results which might lend some credit to physicalism, and that's not right, you know, like they and often the results they get from those experiments can contradict physicalism in so many ways, and the theories they come up with to try to defend physicalism they don't realize it sometimes, but those theories actually contradict what physicalism really stands for. It's and it's actually funny to see physicalist theories contradicting one another. Physicalist scientists, when they try to come up with theories about memory, and they want memory to be stored in the brain. They want that notion to be true. They can be so dogmatic. They want that to be true, and then they try to formulate theories, and these theories contradict one another, and they make no sense. Like memory being stored in synaptic activity, and memories perhaps are preserved by correlations in activity, or synchronized activity in the synapses, and or patterned activity in synapses. Certain patterns that keep recurring are somehow evidence of memory storage, which makes no sense. And then along comes someone else who might say, well, no, it can't be, because memories, otherwise memories don't really exist. They're not really being preserved anywhere. They're just being recalled. And how does the brain recall those what patterns to bring about, to create? How does the brain know specifically what patterns of synaptic activity it requires in order to recall a certain type of memory? How does it retrieve memories with that, if it doesn't really have any awareness of what type of synaptic activity and correlation it needs? And and they might come up with a different theory, even though there's no evidence for it, that somehow memories are stored in the nucleus of neurons, and and that's how memories are stored and recalled into consciousness. And it's just it's a circus, basically. It's almost like they're coming up with whatever narratives they can get in order to preserve their funding, and in order to give a sense that they conform to the the dogma that is physicalism, the doctrine of physicalism, the doctrine of materialism. And we're all being duped by this narrative, and it's a shame. It's still quite prevalent, but I think it's changing. It's definitely changing. Yeah, it's definitely changing. I mean, they just need to scientists in general just need to become better philosophers, They need to really think about the conclusions that they arrive at. They need to think about what the data is really telling them. You know, they need a fresh pair of eyes. They need to realize that they are the victims of confirmation bias. They need to break free from that. They need to start thinking about metaphysics, because that concerns science, and science can point to an ultimate nature of reality. I really do think they ought to practice philosophy, and philosophers could do with practicing science as well, or looking into science, but more so philosophers. I think they would do well to do that, really. They need to at least look into idealism and look at the basic arguments that support it. They need to realize that, as I've said before on one of my videos, they need to realize, and this touches upon not just materialism and idealism, but covers the problem of solipsism, and basically, we need to practice some epistemology. What can we claim to know? Well, first of all, we know that we're conscious. It's undeniable. Consciousness can't be an illusion. So we know that we are conscious, and let's start from the fact that we know our own mind. So we know that a mind exists, our own mind. A mind exists, right? And apparently, from my perspective anyway, let's start from the beginning. I have my own mind. Do I know that other minds exist? Well, I don't know with 100% certainty, hence the problem of solipsism, but I'm quite confident that I am interacting with other minds out there, apart from my own, other personal minds. And I do this by virtue of my theory of mind, which I've developed since I was a toddler, probably. I look at other people. They appear to behave like me. They communicate with me. I recognize intelligence in them. They appear to be other sentient beings like me. Their behavior can be similar to mine as human beings. So I sense that like me, they are human beings, and therefore they've got human minds, similar minds, and they also recognize that I am sentient, And of course, one might say that, well, you don't know that for sure, because you could be the only mind. I could actually be, let's entertain solipsism for a minute here. I could be the only mind that exists. And some of you are listening and probably laughing at this. It is absurd. Yeah, it does sound absurd. I'll grant you that. But let's say that I think that I'm the only mind that exists, and everyone else in my field of awareness is only a figment of my imagination, right? So, but I also can't be sure that that's the case, because everything looks as though solipsism is false. Everything looks as though a plurality of minds exists, right? So, in order for solipsism to be true, someone or something must be pulling the wool over my eyes, or I am deceiving myself with my own imagination, right? I can't trust my own mind, which is the only thing that exists according to solipsism. But and here is where me and Felipe Bautista disagree, and Felipe is the one who came up with Uroboric idealism, which I've mentioned before on my channel, and he's got his own channel called Uroboric Idealism. Basically, Felipe would class himself as a solipsist, but he would say that he's not a dogmatic solipsist. So where we disagree is where I would say that we can't be 100% sure that solipsism is true or that solipsism is false, right? The only thing that we can be sure of with 100% certainty is consciousness. However, we can have degrees of confidence that such and such is the case. So if someone asks me, how sure are you that solipsism is true? I would say not very sure. In fact, it seems absurd to me. But if someone says to me, how sure are you that solipsism is false? How sure are you that a plurality of minds is the case, that you are interacting with people out there? How sure are you that when you make one of your videos on experiential realism, that there are people out there listening and watching your videos? I would say, well, more than 50%. I would say that I'm quite confident that a plurality of minds is the case. I'm quite certain, no, sorry, not certain, but I'm quite confident that when I communicate, that other people are out there to listen, right? I'm quite confident that that's the case, but not 100% certain, right? So we're talking about degrees of confidence here, right? But when it comes to solipsism, I'm not going to entertain it as much as I entertain the notion that a plurality of minds exists, right? Otherwise we get nowhere. Otherwise, what's the point? Otherwise, my whole theory of mind is made redundant. The theory of mind that I developed since I was a kid in order to effectively interact with the world is made redundant. If someone asks me, well, what evidence do you have to be quite confident that solipsism isn't the case? Well, I have as much evidence that solipsism is not the case as possible, as much as I could possibly have, you know, because everything in my field of awareness looks as though a plurality of minds exists, right? And even though we can't fully trust behaviorism, I see other people out there, other human beings that look like me, that can behave similar to me, that exhibits all signs of having their own minds. So everything looks as though a plurality of minds exists, right? And they might say, well, you could also have the same degree of confidence that solipsism is false in a dream, right? To which I would say, okay, but it looks as though solipsism is true in dreams. But even in dreams, how do we know that solipsism is really the case? Because even in dreams, we could be talking to subpersonalities that exist within us. It could be the case that dream characters represent minds that exist within our own personal minds. Like cells exist in the tissues of a larger organism, a larger life form. That could be the case. And in fact, some dream characters seem to exhibit more awareness, more sentience, more intelligence than others. So, to say that everything in a dream is just an appearance, and in a way it is just an appearance, but to say that those appearances do not represent any loci of consciousness apart from our own is begs the question. It just, where's the evidence for that? How can we be so sure? We can't. I mean, when we wake up and the dream is gone, it looks as though everything was just an illusion. It looks as though we were only being deluded in our own imagination, reified by the dream state. But what if we were actually interacting with other minds, and the distortions we perceive in dreams and the changes are only a product of a kind of perceptual channel that isn't stable, that tends to fluctuate, and hence and even though we might be interacting with another sentient being or observer in the dream world, we can still colour them with our imagination. We can still change their appearance, because their appearance is only a symbol that represents their mind. So we can still distort our appearance and mistakenly conclude that the dream character wasn't real, when in fact their form, their appearance represented another mind, right? Or perhaps even an aspect of our own personality with its own awareness. Just as the mind at large can fragment into myriad egoic minds, so can an egoic mind fragment into subpersonalities, and hence we get, multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, stuff like that. We just don't know. We can't even be sure about dreams. We can't even be sure that oniric solipsism is true, let alone solipsism when we're awake, waking life solipsism. But yeah, I once asked Felipe Bautista to tell me how sure is he in terms of percentage that solipsism is true, or that solipsism isn't true. And he came back with a percentage which I disagreed with, which I thought was a bit dishonest, which was, well, he said, I'm about 1% sure that that solipsism is false, right? And that makes no sense to me, because the right thing to say would be that you are 50% sure, at least, and that's not taking into account the theory of mind, right? At least 50% sure, because let's remember that solipsism is unfalsifiable. It's an unfalsifiable proposition, so you should really say 50%, right? Taking into account epistemology and everything else, you should say 50%. But because the allure of the world we live in is so strong, because the would-be illusion of a plurality of minds is so convincing, you have to say that, and you can't escape it, because even Felipe Bautista would have to admit that he can't say that he's only 1% confident that that solipsism isn't the case. He can't say that when he's making YouTube videos for people to watch, right? He can't say that. You have to entertain the possibility that other minds exist apart from your own. So, and you have to take into account the evidence pointing away from solipsism, because everything you have to consider that everything looks as though solipsism is false. Everything looks as though a plurality of minds exists. So, taking that into account, you have to say at least that you're 50% sure. I'm actually, personally speaking, I'm actually more than 50% sure that solipsism is false. And when I'm talking about solipsism, I'm not talking about, because some people might say, well, you believe in solipsism because you have said before that you subscribe to monistic idealism, which practically says that we are all one mind. There is only one mind, experiencing the illusion of diversity, right? Yes, but that's not solipsism. I don't consider that to be solipsism. To me, that's monistic idealism. Solipsism and monistic idealism are two different things, right? Solipsism is concerned with personal minds, personal, egoic, restricted minds, right? Solipsism is concerned with claiming that only one personal human mind exists and everything else is just a dream of that mind. Everything else is just a figment of its imagination. That is solipsism, and that's what I'm claiming to be false. I don't believe that I'm the only mind that exists, right? And I see plenty of evidence strongly suggesting that a plurality of minds exists. You see where I'm coming from now? So that's enough to formulate a theory of mind. And the theory of mind is based upon or entertains the notion that other minds exist apart from my own. That's it, right? It's similar to the same argument made by agnostic atheists, in regards to the biblical God. An agnostic atheist might say, well, I don't believe in the biblical God because there's no evidence for that God, right? There is only an absence of evidence, and although an absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, there is still an absence, right? And the time to believe in that God is when there's evidence for that God, real evidence, right? Because what's considered evidence by theists and people who subscribe to the religion that upholds the existence of that God, the notion of that God, might not be enough for someone who disbelieves in that God. So it's the same with solipsism. I go by the evidence which is consistent on a day-to-day basis. I wake up and I see evidence for other minds apart from my own. Other human minds, other animal minds. I wake up and I see evidence that my dog exists. My dog responds to me. I respond to my dog. My dog seems to make his own decisions. He reacts to me and to its environment. I see evidence for a canine mind, right? And I also see evidence for human minds out there apart from my own. So I'm a realist in that sense. And, if I'm going to entertain solipsism as though I'm 100% sure of solipsism, I am required to come up with an explanation for why my own mind is deceiving me to the point where it looks like a plurality of minds is the case. It needs an explanation, because if solipsism is true, then then I'm deceiving myself, because there can't possibly be something or someone pulling the wool over my eyes, because then that would imply the existence of an extra mind apart from my own. So anyway, in order to come up with a metaphysical model, right, be it physicalism or idealism or anything else, we need to make a leap of faith, and this is what Felipe doesn't seem to understand. A leap of faith is required. And how do we make a leap of faith from one mind, from the one mind that we can be 100% sure of, right? our own personal minds, right? Our individual mind. How do we make that leap of faith from one mind to a plurality of minds? That happens when we take into account the theory of mind. We've got plenty of evidence strongly suggesting the existence of a plurality of minds. So that's how we make that leap of faith, right? And every theory requires a leap of faith or a miracle. But in this case, it's not a miracle, it's a leap, right? It's a leap of faith that we must take in order for us to move forward, right? So we've ascertained that an individual mind exists, our own, right, which can be individually verified, and then we make the leap of faith by taking into account the evidence in perception that a plurality of minds is very likely to be the case. So there are other minds apart from our own. So we have that, and then we have enough for idealism. You know, a plurality of minds exists, right? But then physicalism takes extra steps. Physicalism begins to say that there is a physical world devoid of a mind, right? There is physical matter devoid of consciousness, which exists beyond all minds, right? And that's the substrate of reality. Okay? How can we verify that? Because everything that we perceive is in mind, right? Everything. We only have evidence for mentations. So physicalism makes a very tall claim for itself. Physicalism goes beyond evidence. Physicalism, as Castro pointed out, goes against the natural arrow of inference, which is the unknown is derived from the known, right, or assumed from the known, and not the other way around, right? The unknown is inferred from the known and not the other way around. Not the unknown inferred from the known. So let me say this again. The natural arrow of inference is the known. First we have the known. So the unknown is inferred from the known and not the other way around. We don't infer the known from the unknown. And if we consider Kantian logic on metaphysics, if we take into account transcendental idealism and we take seriously the concepts of noumena and phenomena, we soon realize that if there is such a thing as matter outside mind, we can't possibly confirm it. We can't know it. We can't be sure of it. And yet we have a great portion of the scientific community behaving as though we are already certain that physicalism is true, right? And then they take one extra step to say that matter, which is the unknown that they pretend to already know with 100% certainty. So matter, which apparently is beyond mind, but we can, somehow perceive it, which makes no sense because I thought that matter existed outside of mind. Matter somehow, they take the extra step to claim that matter somehow begets matter, so matter, which we can't be sure of as a thing that exists outside minds, somehow begets the only thing that we can be sure of, which is mind, consciousness, right? The only thing that we can be sure of because we are it. We can know it directly. And it's it violates Occam's razor. So just this simple exercise in philosophy, in reasoning, in epistemology, is enough to show that physicalism is a type of metaphysics in violation of sound reasoning, and it just makes tall claims for itself. It's absurd. It's a weak metaphysics. And idealism is more parsimonious. Idealism sticks to mind, the only thing that you can be sure of. Idealism sticks to consciousness. Everything starts from consciousness, right? Consciousness is primary, and matter is probably a derivative of consciousness. Matter is an adjective that we came up with for how something feels in your own mind. It's a particular type of mentation, and that's all there is to it. If you think that, not James Boswell, what's his name? If you think that Samuel Johnson, the lexicographer, had a point centuries ago, if you think Samuel Johnson won the argument by saying to the Bishop George Berkeley that by kicking a stone I refute your argument, I refute it thus, as he put it, you've got another thing coming, because he only proved Berkeley's point, and Berkeley subscribed to a type of subjective idealism, which was called immaterialism at the time. Berkeley believed that everything existed in the mind of God, and it was all mind, right? And he was against materialism. And as the story goes, Samuel Johnson kicked a large stone, and his foot rebounded, and he turned around to Berkeley and said, "I refute it thus," as if to say that, there's a stone there outside our minds. I've just proved it. It's there. It's solid. It's real. But all Johnson showed was that all we have evidence for was vision, perhaps audition, and tactility. In his case, he would have felt it, wouldn't he, by kicking the stone. There's only evidence for mentation in every instance, right? Solidity happens in your mind. It's felt. It's a feeling. The way the stone looks and its color and its texture is also features of the mind. Everything is a feature of mind, right? Its appearance, how it sounds, how it feels, it's just mind. And you can also go one step further to say that the stone can also make an appearance in one's dream. We can dream of that very same stone, and it can feel just as real to the dreamer, right? In a vivid dream, objects look solid and real, and you can touch them, and you can hear them, and you can see them vividly. And yet, and you might even say in the dream, "Oh, that's proof that the stone exists physically. It's a real object, and it's an object which exists outside of my own mind. It's apart from me. It exists apart from me," only to wake up and realize that it was a mental illusion. It had no physical substance. It had no standalone existence. It was all you as part of your mind, because your mind exists. And that's it. And that's all you have evidence for. Your consciousness and the contents of your consciousness which make up your mind. And just that argument is enough to show that idealism is more parsimonious and more compelling than physicalism or materialism. And I've made a video about this before, and I feel like saying it again for part one of this two-parter. This is like a project for me, to show that, to convey my own journey from materialism to idealism, and also to show that you can largely refute materialism using that one simple argument, right? Otherwise you're in violation of Occam's razor, and you're supposed to make the least assumptions possible. Why add to a working theory unnecessarily? Why why conjure unnecessary entities? They're superfluous. Physicality is superfluous. apart from mind. And in physicalism, what are you claiming anyway? Are you claiming to be a dualist or a monist? Because if you're claiming to be a dualist, then you have to entertain the possibility that there is a physical world devoid of feeling, of consciousness, and then you have to assume that there's another substance added to it, which is mind, and then you have to explain both, and you fail at both. And if you're going to take the eliminativist approach, if you're going to be a proper physicalist and say that there is only matter, if you're going to be a monistic physicalist, you also have a problem, because you have to explain the alleged epiphenomenon of consciousness, and explain how that can possibly be an illusion, and to whom. So this is mainly why I'm an idealist today. There's no need to add unnecessary entities to a working theory or hypothesis. It's and then those are not the only reasons. I'm not just subscribing to idealism from purely a philosophical position and using epistemology and being careful not to violate the natural arrow of inference and Occam's razor. I also take into account my own experiences, which tell me that there is more to reality than what we normally perceive, in our default mode. And I've had some extraordinary experiences which make me think that there is a oneness, that consciousness and meaning are layers of reality, that consciousness is primary, and meaning is a layer of reality. It's another flavor of perception, and so is physicality, and so is everything else. Consciousness begets conceptual realities. Consciousness entertains itself with modes of perception, with multiple dimensions, with imagination. Consciousness is definitely real. It's not something that's illusory. It's not, we need to embrace that brute fact of reality. Consciousness is reality itself. Consciousness is experience, and experience exists. Get used to it, right? And we need to confront this, and we may also have to confront the fact that no narrative may be able to explain the nature of consciousness. Perhaps the only explanation, so to speak, is direct experience. In order to understand it, you have to experience it yourself. Look at your own awareness, and that's it. And perhaps no words can fully convey what it's like. it's first person ontology, and it's irreducible, and everything else, every other mentation, every other appearance follows from it, right? Appearances which may create illusions that there is something outside of mind, that there's separability, when it's all just one thing. And I think this is the end of part one. There will be a second part, and I will continue with this subject and touch upon many other subjects. And thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you very much.